Hey, let me tell you a bedtime story. You don't need to think about tomorrow right now. Just breathe in and let the rain outside do the talking. The world can wait. Tonight is only for quiet and for rest. So close your eyes, listen to the sound of the rain, and let the story carry you somewhere soft, somewhere peaceful. She lied about her pregnancy for a year. What would you do if someone you trusted spun a story so convincing, so consistent, that it became impossible to question? This is the story of a lie so elaborate it consumed friendships, trust, and the very perception of reality. For a full year, everyone around her believed she was expecting a child. Messages, photos, belly updates, and emotional confessions wove a convincing narrative that no one dared to doubt. But beneath the surface, deception thrived. What began as a personal secret slowly morphed into a web of lies, manipulation, and unraveling truths that would leave everyone questioning everything. The lies started subtly, with casual comments about cravings, fatigue, or doctor appointments. Friends reacted with care, excitement, and support, unknowingly feeding the illusion. Gradually, the narrative expanded. Gender reveals, baby showers, ultrasound photos, every detail crafted with precision. Each act reinforced the lie and strengthened the circle of trust and attention around her. For a year, everyone participated in the story, unaware that it was entirely fabricated. Suspicion rarely arose. Love and empathy blinded those closest to her. And when the truth finally emerged, the fallout was catastrophic. Friendships shattered, trust obliterated, and the very foundation of relationships crumbled. It began with small hints, sudden exhaustion, mood swings, and casual mentions of doctor visits. Friends offered support immediately, checking in regularly and providing help. Messages were exchanged late at night, filled with gratitude for concern and updates on the pregnancy journey. Every detail seemed plausible and heartfelt. No one questioned her. The subtlety of the lies made them believable, even intimate. Friends felt privileged to be trusted with personal information. The excitement grew with every month. Plans for celebrations, gifts, and advice reinforced the illusion and increased emotional investment. By the end of the first chapter, the seed of deception had been planted firmly in the minds and hearts of those around her. Over the next few months, the lie grew more elaborate. Photos, social media posts, and staged appointments created a convincing narrative that friends couldn't doubt. She spoke about cravings, baby names, and milestones with the confidence of someone truly experiencing it. Friends shared in the excitement, offering support and advice at every turn. Even minor inconsistencies were smoothed over with charm, humor, or emotional appeals. The lie was practiced and perfected, leaving no room for suspicion. Friends began prioritizing her needs, rearranging schedules to attend appointments, celebrations, or special moments she claimed were significant. By the end of this chapter, the illusion had consumed daily life, drawing everyone further into a fabricated reality. Emotional dependence grew alongside the lie. Friends provided constant support, reassurance, and validation, reinforcing her control over attention and affection. Gifts, well wishes, and advice became daily rituals. Each act of care deepened the emotional bond, making doubt seem almost impossible. Subtle guilt trips ensured that anyone questioning her story appeared unsupportive or insensitive. Friends feared confrontation, prioritizing harmony over skepticism. Even casual conversations outside the pregnancy topic were influenced, with friends eager to maintain trust and avoid causing distress. By the end of this chapter, everyone involved was deeply entwined in the fabricated story, unknowingly validating the lie every day. Signs of inconsistency began to emerge. Friends noticed repeated excuses, unclear timelines, and contradictions between stories shared publicly and privately. Suspicion, though quiet at first, grew stronger with every discrepancy. A misplaced photo, an unverified appointment, or an offhand comment sparked questions. Attempts to clarify were met with defensiveness, tears, or emotional appeals, making confrontation difficult. The lie had grown into a sophisticated system of manipulation. Friends felt torn. Loyalty and empathy clashed with growing awareness of deceit. The emotional weight of confronting the truth became heavier each day. By the end of this chapter, the delicate balance between belief and doubt teetered, setting the stage for inevitable revelation. As months passed, small inconsistencies became harder to ignore. Friends noticed missed appointments, vague medical updates, and unusual behavior during pregnancy milestones. Questions began circulating quietly among the group. Casual conversations turned into subtle investigations, trying to reconcile the narrative with reality. The liar remained confident, deflecting doubts with charm, humor, or emotional appeals. Each response strengthened the facade, keeping suspicion at bay for a while. Friends were caught between hope and doubt, unwilling to confront her directly, but uneasy about the mounting inconsistencies. By the end of this chapter, the tension had grown palpable. Everyone sensed that something was wrong, even if they couldn't pinpoint what. She began using guilt and empathy to maintain control. Friends who expressed doubt were subtly shamed or reminded of the effort and emotional support they had given. Messages became a tool for control. Expressions of fatigue, worry, or longing prompted concern, ensuring continued attention and validation. Friends felt trapped, wanting to believe, yet questioning everything. The emotional manipulation deepened their investment in the lie. Even casual interactions outside the pregnancy topic were influenced, as she skillfully redirected attention and maintained dominance over the narrative. By the end of this chapter, the lie had become a powerful tool, controlling emotions, relationships, and perceptions simultaneously. She began subtly isolating friends from outside perspectives. Suggestions that others didn't understand her situation, or that they were unsupportive, created tension between friends and family. Friends began relying more on her updates, advice, and emotional needs, further entrenching the deception. Outside voices of reason were dismissed or framed as intrusive, making the group more dependent on her narrative. Each layer of isolation strengthened the illusion, leaving friends trapped in a bubble of false reality. By the end of this chapter, the lie had not only controlled perceptions, but also dictated social dynamics. Despite careful planning, cracks in the story began to show. Missed details, unexplained absences, and discrepancies in shared photos triggered curiosity and doubt. One friend discovered a contradiction that couldn't be easily explained. Whispers of suspicion began to circulate more openly. Attempts to clarify were met with defensiveness, dramatic emotional reactions, or guilt-laden responses. Yet the cracks were widening, making deception harder to maintain. Friends began documenting inconsistencies, comparing stories, and questioning their assumptions. Anxiety replaced the previous excitement and trust. By the end of this chapter, the facade was weakening, and the first seeds of confrontation had been planted. The first direct confrontation occurred when a friend presented undeniable evidence contradicting the pregnancy story. Tension erupted immediately. She reacted with tears, apologies, and pleas for understanding, framing her lie as a result of loneliness, fear, or emotional need. Friends felt a mixture of anger, betrayal, and disbelief. Trust, once absolute, shattered in a matter of moments. The emotional fallout was immediate. Relationships fractured, and the reality of the deception began to ripple through the group. By the end of this chapter, it was clear that the lie had unraveled, leaving chaos, heartbreak, and the painful work of recovery ahead. The friends struggled to process the betrayal. Shock, anger, and sadness collided as they reflected on how easily they had been deceived. Mia felt hurt for having celebrated milestones that never existed, while Jordan was frustrated at having invested emotionally for so long. Lila experienced guilt for not questioning earlier. They shared their feelings openly, seeking validation and understanding from one another. Talking about the deception helped alleviate some of the emotional burden. Even as they processed emotions, there was lingering disbelief. How could someone lie so convincingly for an entire year? By the end of this chapter, the friends had begun to navigate the painful journey of recovery. A formal confrontation took place, where the liar admitted the truth. The confession was full of excuses, emotional appeals, and explanations of fear, loneliness, and desire for attention. Friends listened, torn between empathy and outrage. While some sympathy existed for her personal struggles, the magnitude of the deceit overshadowed it. The conversation was raw, emotional, and revealing. Every lie was dissected, and every manipulated feeling acknowledged. This confrontation became a turning point, forcing everyone to confront not just the lie, but also their own trust, judgment, and emotional responses. By the end of the chapter, clarity emerged, though forgiveness and reconciliation remained uncertain. Even after the confession, the emotional fallout was intense. Friendships were strained, trust fractured, and social dynamics shifted dramatically. Mia and Jordan felt cautious about future interactions, unsure if reconciliation was possible. Lila wrestled with lingering resentment and disbelief. The liar attempted to make amends, offering apologies, explanations, and gestures of reconciliation. But the group remained wary. Each interaction was colored by the knowledge of manipulation. Simple conversations carried the weight of past deception, making normalcy feel impossible. By the end of this chapter, the group was navigating the delicate balance between rebuilding trust and protecting emotional well-being. Slowly, efforts to rebuild trust began. Boundaries were established, honesty became non-negotiable, and open communication was prioritized. Friends cautiously reconnected, testing sincerity and observing consistency over time. Trust was earned through actions rather than words. The liar demonstrated effort, accountability, and transparency, showing willingness to regain credibility. Patience and time became essential tools in the rebuilding process. Shared experiences outside the context of the lie helped strengthen connections and slowly restore confidence in relationships. By the end of this chapter, the first foundations of repaired friendships had been laid, fragile but hopeful. Reflection became key. The group acknowledged how easily trust can be manipulated, and how empathy, when unchecked, can be exploited. Each friend learned to recognize red flags, set personal boundaries, and question inconsistencies without guilt. They also discovered the importance of communication, vigilance, and support networks in maintaining healthy relationships. Even though pain remained, the experience became a lesson in resilience, awareness, and emotional intelligence. By the end of the chapter, the group had not only begun healing, but also gained the tools to protect themselves from future deception. Even as friendships began to mend, lingering doubts remained. Friends sometimes questioned whether they had truly understood her motives, or missed other signs of deception. Mia and Jordan occasionally revisited conversations in their minds, analyzing every detail. Lila reflected on how easily they had been convinced and how trust had been exploited. Despite these doubts, awareness provided protection. The friends began trusting their instincts more, learning to balance empathy with critical thinking. Small victories, making independent decisions and voicing concerns without fear, helped rebuild confidence and emotional resilience. By the end of the chapter, doubts remained but were transformed into caution and wisdom rather than fear and mistrust. The friends focused on strengthening genuine connections with one another, rebuilding trust on a foundation of honesty and transparency. Group activities, shared experiences, and open discussions about past manipulation reinforced solidarity and mutual support. Mia, Jordan, and Lila became vigilant in protecting each other from future deception while practicing empathy and understanding. Every positive interaction reinforced the lesson that trust must be earned and maintained, not assumed. By the end of this chapter, the group's bonds had grown stronger, more resilient, and better equipped to handle challenges. Reflection became a daily habit. The friends considered how they had been deceived and what personal growth could come from the experience. They acknowledged vulnerabilities, learned from mistakes, and developed strategies to recognize manipulation in the future. Mia focused on self-trust, Jordan on discernment, and Lila on setting boundaries, each strengthening different aspects of emotional intelligence. These lessons transformed pain into empowerment, allowing them to navigate relationships more consciously. By the end of the chapter, the group had begun to grow stronger individually and collectively, using past experiences as a guide. Confidence slowly returned. Friends trusted their instincts, questioned inconsistencies, and maintained boundaries with clarity. They began making decisions independently, reassessing relationships, and asserting themselves in situations where manipulation might arise. The liar's presence diminished in emotional influence, replaced by personal agency and empowerment. Mia, Jordan, and Lila learned that recovery requires patience, vigilance, and consistent action, not just time. By the end of this chapter, confidence had been reclaimed, and control over personal lives was restored. Finally, the group embraced a future free from the deception that had dominated the past year. Trust was rebuilt cautiously, boundaries were respected, and communication was open. Mia, Jordan, and Lila celebrated autonomy, resilience, and personal growth, recognizing the power of awareness and discernment in protecting themselves. The liar's impact remained a lesson, not a prison. The friends moved forward, stronger, wiser, and more vigilant in all areas of life. Reflection turned into empowerment. Past deception became a reference point for vigilance, empathy, and trust, built through actions rather than words. By the story's conclusion, the friends had transformed the painful experience into growth, understanding, and the capacity to maintain genuine, healthy relationships. The first few weeks after everything unraveled felt surreal. Silence used to feel like punishment, Now it was freedom. Mia found herself taking long walks alone, breathing in air that no longer felt heavy with lies. Jordan filled notebooks with thoughts he had suppressed for months, rediscovering his own voice. Lila began therapy, learning to separate her worth from the manipulations she had endured. They didn't need constant validation anymore. They needed peace. Healing didn't arrive in a straight line. It came in fragments. Some mornings they laughed easily. Other nights, the weight of what had happened returned like a shadow. But the difference now was choice. They could face it, acknowledge it, and let it pass without sinking back into fear. The quiet after chaos was not emptiness. It was recovery in motion. Trust was the hardest lesson, not just in others, but in themselves, in their ability to see clearly, to set boundaries, to believe that kindness didn't always come with a price. Mia learned to trust her intuition again, realizing that her discomfort had always been a warning she ignored out of loyalty. Jordan practiced saying no without guilt, understanding that peace was not selfishness. And Lila learned to forgive herself, not for believing the lie, but for staying too long inside it. They didn't rush connection. This time, they built it slowly, like laying bricks over a fragile foundation. Each honest conversation, each moment of vulnerability, was a small act of rebuilding faith in humanity, one truth at a time. Freedom came with responsibility. For the first time, they understood that protecting peace meant protecting space. Mia began journaling every night, not to record pain, but to understand patterns. Jordan deleted old messages, not out of anger, but closure. Leila stopped explaining her boundaries to people who didn't respect them. Boundaries became their new language, a quiet strength disguised as calm. They no longer needed approval. The peace they protected was their own. And slowly, balance returned between saying yes to life and no to harm. They met at a cafe, the same one where so many manipulated conversations had happened before. But this time, the air was lighter. Instead of decoding lies, they spoke truth. Instead of watching for hidden motives, they listened. Laughter came naturally again, awkward at first, but genuine. Healing had changed the way they communicated. They learned to pause before reacting, to ask instead of assuming, and to speak even when it felt uncomfortable. They realized that vulnerability, once weaponized against them, could now be used to heal. The same voices that once trembled with confusion now carried certainty. Individually, they grew into new versions of themselves. Mia pursued creative projects she had abandoned, rediscovering her passion for design. Jordan traveled alone for the first time, terrified but exhilarated. Lila found strength in mentorship, guiding others who faced manipulation and gaslighting. Each step forward felt like reclaiming stolen time. Their laughter no longer carried bitterness, but pride. They weren't who they were before the deception. They were more aware, more grounded, more alive. The liar had taken their trust, but in its place they built wisdom. Even as life moved forward, echoes remained. A song, a phrase, a memory. Small things could bring it all back in an instant, but they no longer felt trapped by it. The pain had lost its power. Instead of fear, they felt understanding. Instead of anger, gratitude for the clarity gained. Mia wrote about her experience, not for revenge, but release. Jordan found forgiveness, not for the liar, but for himself. And Lila learned that closure doesn't always come from words. Sometimes it's found in silence. They stopped asking, "Why did this happen?" and started asking, "What did I learn?" That question changed everything. Healing made space for new people. Slowly, new friends entered their lives. People who didn't remind them of the past, but reflected their growth. They learned what healthy connection looked like. Conversations without fear. Affection without conditions. Mia opened up again, cautiously, but with hope. Jordan found someone who listened. Lila, once guarded, laughed freely again. They didn't rush to fill the void the liar left behind. They built something better, not a replacement, but a renewal. The circle expanded, not through trust in others, but through trust in themselves. Awareness became their armor, not paranoia, but presence. They noticed red flags without overreacting, and recognized sincerity without suspicion. Mia taught her younger sister about emotional boundaries. Jordan began speaking publicly about manipulation recovery. Lila joined a support group and turned pain into purpose. Their experiences became tools, not scars. What once broke them now helped others heal. Awareness transformed their suffering into service. Proof that truth, when accepted, becomes strength. Letting go wasn't a single act. It was a quiet, daily choice. Some days they still felt the ghost of betrayal whispering through memory. But now it no longer stayed. They had learned that peace doesn't come from erasing the past, but from releasing its hold. They stopped waiting for apologies that would never come. They stopped rewriting old stories to make sense of the senseless. Instead, they chose to live fully, not despite what happened, but because of what it taught them. Freedom wasn't forgetting. It was forgiving life for being imperfect, and themselves for surviving it. The sun rose on a quiet morning, warm, gentle, new. Mia brewed coffee, Jordan sent a message to a friend, and Lila opened her window to let the breeze in. Ordinary things, simple, real. They no longer looked back with bitterness, but with understanding. Every wound had become wisdom, every scar a reminder of strength. The past year was a storm, violent, consuming, but it cleared the skies for something better. In the stillness of that new dawn, they felt it. Not an ending, but a beginning. A life built on awareness, connection, and truth. The deception that once bound them was gone, and in its place, they found themselves. 5 years had passed since the storm ended. The world did not erase what happened. It simply softened it, the way time smooths the edges of broken glass. Mia had opened her own small studio, designing things that carried meaning, light, truth, balance. Every creation felt like a piece of her recovery turned tangible. Jordan now worked with young creatives, teaching them to find their voice and keep it, no matter who tries to rewrite their story. Lila had become a counselor, gentle yet unyielding, guiding others through the same darkness she once walked alone. They didn't talk about the liar anymore. The story no longer belonged to that person. It belonged to them and how they rose from it. Their friendship remained, quieter now, but stronger. When they met, they spoke more about the future than the past. Healing had become second nature, not an act, but a rhythm of life. And sometimes, when the three of them sat together in the same old cafe, they smiled at how far they'd come. Not every scar was visible, but every scar told a story of endurance, and that was enough. At sunset, Mia stood by her window, watching the sky shift from gold to violet. The world outside was still imperfect, messy, unpredictable, beautifully alive, but she no longer feared it. She understood now, awareness wasn't a shield to hide behind. It was a lantern to carry forward. Jordan once said, We were meant to break open, not apart. And in that truth, they had found something lasting. Connection born from clarity, love built on choice, and peace earned through truth. Lila often reminded them that healing doesn't erase pain, it redefines it. Their past was still there, but its weight had changed. Where there was once manipulation, now there was meaning. Where there was confusion, now there was calm. They were no longer the victims of a lie, they were the authors of a lesson. And as the last light of day faded, they felt no need for final words. Only gratitude for survival, for awareness, and for the rare, quiet strength of those who choose to rebuild. A journey from chaos to clarity, from betrayal to empowerment. They didn't just survive. As time moved further, the past became a story they could tell without shaking. The liar no longer haunted their thoughts, just a name that had lost its power. Distance had done its quiet work, wrapping the memories in layers of perspective. Mia found herself smiling at things that used to make her flinch. She realized that healing wasn't forgetting, it was remembering without pain. Jordan, now surrounded by new faces, carried lessons in his voice when he spoke of trust. Lila still felt echoes of the past on sleepless nights, but she met them with compassion, not fear. They no longer sought closure, they had lived it. The distance between who they were and who they had become was gentle now, not a gap to cross, but a space that proved how much they'd grown. Every ending plants something. From the soil of betrayal had grown understanding, thick, rooted, and alive. Mia started hosting workshops about creative recovery, showing others how art could turn pain into purpose. Jordan began volunteering with youth organizations, teaching emotional intelligence to those who hadn't yet learned to guard their hearts. Lila's work in therapy deepened. She helped others recognize manipulation before it consumed them. They had turned survival into service. The story that once broke them now saved others. And sometimes, when they looked back, they didn't see victims anymore. They saw gardeners, because everything they had endured had become seeds, and everything they had learned had begun to bloom. Years later, the world had changed around them. New people, new chapters, new dreams. But the essence of their journey stayed. Awareness, empathy, truth. Mia, Jordan, and Lila gathered one evening under soft string lights, sharing quiet laughter. They didn't need to say much. The silence between them was full of understanding. The liar's story had faded into history, but the wisdom it birthed had become a legacy. They had discovered that peace wasn't found in forgetting what hurt, but in remembering how they healed. Every scar they carried had turned into light, guiding others who still walked through darkness. As the night deepened, Mia whispered, "We made it through something that tried to break us, and now we build." Jordan nodded. Lila smiled. The stars shimmered above them like witnesses. The past had lost its voice, but their future sang. The years no longer felt like a distance. They felt like a journey back home. Every scar had softened. Every memory had settled into peace. Mia often sat by her window at dawn, coffee in hand, feeling the warmth of the sun on her face. It reminded her of how far she had come, from darkness to understanding, from confusion to calm. Jordan's art had matured, his music echoing both joy and restraint. Each note carried the truth he once struggled to speak. Lila had become known for her calm presence, the kind of quiet that could heal a room. The quiet light that once seemed unreachable now lived inside them. It was not blinding or loud. It was steady, gentle, real. It was the kind of light born only from surviving the storm and choosing to love again. For the first time in years, laughter returned without hesitation. It came from deep within, unforced, unguarded, alive. They had forgotten what pure joy felt like until it arrived one evening, unannounced, during a simple dinner where memories no longer hurt. Mia told stories of the past without trembling. Jordan imitated his younger self with humour. Lila laughed so hard she cried, but this time they were tears of release. It was then they realized healing doesn't erase pain, it redefines it. Joy had not replaced grief, it had grown from it. Every moment of laughter now carried the strength of everything they survived, and that made it sacred. With time came clarity, a rare kind, earned only by walking through darkness. They saw now that the liar's actions had been a mirror, showing them not their weakness, but their capacity for growth. Mia often said, "If it hadn't happened, I wouldn't have learned to trust myself." Jordan added, "And I wouldn't have known how deep loyalty could cut or heal." Lila, always reflective, replied, "It taught me that empathy needs boundaries to survive." Perspective transformed the story from tragedy to lesson, and that lesson became a compass, guiding them toward a life built on truth. The pain no longer defined them, it refined them. One evening, they gathered by the ocean, the same shore they had once visited to escape their pain. But this time, there was no weight to carry. The sound of the waves wasn't a reminder of what was lost. It was a song of what endured. They talked about the future, the people they would become, the peace they would protect, the boundaries they would never let fall again. Mia watched the horizon, whispering softly, "We made it." Jordan skipped a stone and smiled. Leela breathed deeply, feeling the salt air fill her lungs, a simple, perfect reminder that she was alive. The ocean kept moving, endless, constant, just like healing. They realized the present was not a pause between past and future. It was the reward for surviving both. Years later, the world still spun, full of noise, change, and uncertainty. But in the quiet moments, the soft mornings, the deep nights, peace lingered. Mia continued creating, her art carrying the message of awareness and hope. Jordan mentored those lost in confusion, teaching them that truth, though painful, always frees. Lila became a symbol of calm resilience, proof that softness can be powerful. They no longer needed to speak of the lie or the liar. Their lives had already spoken louder, with kindness, strength, and clarity. Their legacy was not born from revenge, but from renewal. And as the sun set one last time over their shared story, they felt it. A silence that was not emptiness, but completion. The past no longer asked to be understood. It only asked to be thanked. The circle had closed. The lesson had lived. The peace, at last, was theirs. They began as victims. They became survivors. They ended as teachers, living proof that awareness is the purest form of freedom. Peace, it turned out, was contagious. The calm they carried began to affect the people around them. Co-workers felt lighter after talking to Mia. Her quiet strength spoke louder than advice ever could. Jordan's students found courage in his honesty, realizing that vulnerability wasn't weakness. It was wisdom. Lila's clients said she had a gift for hearing what wasn't said, for seeing pain behind a smile. The ripples of their recovery spread far beyond what they imagined. Their growth inspired others to confront their own deceptions, to speak truth where silence once ruled. They realized healing was not meant to end within oneself. It was meant to move, to touch, to transform. Not everything was perfect, and that was okay. There were still days when old memories flickered back like ghosts at the edge of thought. But instead of fear, they met those ghosts with grace. Mia learned to accept uncertainty as part of life. Jordan no longer demanded closure from every story. He understood that some truths don't need to be spoken aloud. Lila found peace in imperfection, reminding herself that scars are simply proof of healing. Acceptance wasn't surrender. It was liberation. It meant no longer fighting the past, but walking beside it. They didn't need to win against what had hurt them, because they had already outgrown it. Purpose arrived quietly, not as a revelation, but as a realization. They had spent years surviving, healing, learning. Now it was time to live. Mia's designs began to appear in exhibitions, works that celebrated recovery and truth. Jordan published a book, a memoir that spoke of resilience, honesty, and rebuilding identity after betrayal. Lila opened her own counseling center, calling it The Bridge, a place where pain could cross into peace. Their paths were no longer defined by what they escaped, but by what they created. They no longer asked, "Why me?" They asked, "What can I build from this?" And that question carried them forward. The world could still be cruel. They saw it every day. But instead of becoming hardened by it, they met it with understanding. Kindness had once been used against them, twisted by manipulation. Now it became their armor, firm, not fragile. Mia forgave quietly. Jordan helped without expectation. Lila listened deeply, even when it hurt. They had learned that true kindness isn't naivety, it's strength. It's the decision to remain gentle in a world that tried to make you cold. And though the liar's name had long faded from memory, the lesson remained. Compassion is not weakness. It's the highest form of clarity. Years later, they reunited once more, older, grounded, unshaken. They sat beneath a warm sunset, the sky painted with amber and violet. Time had taken many things, but it had also given something greater, peace that endured. They spoke of how far they'd come, from the darkness that once bound them to the freedom that now defined them. No bitterness, no anger, just quiet gratitude. Mia placed her hand over her heart and said, "We didn't just survive. We changed the shape of what survival means." Jordan nodded. Lila smiled, her eyes soft with light. The air around them hummed with stillness, not empty, but alive. The circle had closed completely. And somewhere, in the quiet between their laughter and the fading light, the past finally bowed and let them go. They began in confusion, wandered through betrayal, but emerged as creators of peace, keepers of awareness, and mirrors of hope. Their legacy wasn't revenge, it was rebirth.